Become a sustaining member of the Commonwealth Club for just $10 a month. Join today.
Welcome to the Commonwealth Club. My name is Dr. Patrick O'Reilly. I'm chair of the Psychology Forum, and I'm absolutely delighted to introduce our tonight's speaker, Ms. Seth Brisk. He is the Anti-Defamation League Central Pacific Regional Director, serving Northern California, Utah, and Hawaii. Mr. Brisk is a former provisional delegate to the State Department's Committee on Religious Freedom Abroad and a representative to the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. In 2013, the Republic of Poland conferred upon him the rank of Officer of the Order of Merit. And there will be 15 minutes at the end of his presentation for questions. So please put your questions to the YouTube text chat and they will be forwarded to me. So Mr. Brisk, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. And I want to thank the Commonwealth Club for having me today to talk about this very important topic. I'm going to violate a cardinal rule of public speaking, which is I'm going to apologize to all of you from the start, which is to say that I'm going to be showing you some very distressing images and just want everyone to be prepared for that. So now I'll share my screen and we'll get started. We live in an era of emboldened extremists from a range of movements. They are increasingly skilled at exploiting technology to recruit and radicalize followers. What you see here is an image from Telegram, which is an encrypted messaging service that is one of several communication platforms extremists use. Tonight, I will outline some approaches to an understanding of extremism, some of the recent trends we see, and on-the-ground actions we monitor. Now, I want to be clear from the outset. At this time, ADL is not aware of any credible threats of violence. And nevertheless, as extremists have become more bold, it is prudent that we maintain a heightened awareness, even as we avoid fear and paranoia. So be vigilant, be observant, stay informed, and confront hatred by taking precautions, living your life, reporting incidents, among other actions. In brief, speak up, show strength, and share facts. Now, the organization that I represent, ADL, was founded in 1913. Here you see an image from our original charter. It mandates our work to, quote, stop the defamation of the Jewish people and to secure justice and fair treatment to all, end quote. It's a dual mission, particular and universal, which has always inspired and informed ADL's work. Studies have shown that hate rarely confines itself to targeting one community. When people believe a lie, promote a conspiracy, or engage in a stereotype about one group, they will about others. If it helps, think of Pastor Martin Niemöller's famous post-Holocaust reflection. First, they came for the socialists, but I did not speak up because I was not a socialist. In other words, preventing hate and extremism requires acting against all forms of bias and bigotry, proactively and reactively through a variety of means. We all have bias. It is hardwired into our brains through evolution. We process millions of bits of information on a constant basis. As hunter-gatherers, bias provided shortcuts to determine if a noise was a potential source of food or if we were about to become a meal. Today, in a socially interconnected environment, bias can manifest in harmful ways. What you see here is ADL's pyramid of hate. It is a visual reminder of the importance of disrupting hate at its earliest moments. It helps to explain how bias grows and is at the heart of our anti-bias education training. Like the large bottom section of the pyramid, we all have biased attitudes, some implicit, some explicit. Biased attitudes may manifest through stereotyping, microaggressions, language, etc. Moving up a level, fewer people will act on their bias through bullying, slurs, or even humor. Fewer people still will engage in unlawful acts of discrimination, and a small fringe will commit violence to express their bias. On rare occasions and unchecked, by legal, moral, or other restraints, extreme bias can lead to genocide. Of course, not everyone who holds a biased attitude will go on to commit genocide, though those who do will pass through the other levels of the pyramid on the way. It helps us conceptualize that words matter. In describing the infamous Nazi concentration and death camp where over 1 million people were murdered, Holocaust survivor and ADL former National Director Abe Foxman says, quote, "Auschwitz was not built with bricks, it was built with words," end quote. Society needed to dehumanize and demonize people before they would permit or participate as their colleagues, neighbors, and even friends were rounded up and carted off for extermination. Fighting extremism and hate has never been more important. Our staff monitors, exposes, and disrupts extremist threats and activity on the ground and online. We share our expertise and support with law enforcement, the tech industry, policymakers, and the public. As ADL's research and investigative arm, the Center on Extremism is a clearinghouse of real-time information about extremism and hate of all types. Our staff regularly serve as expert witnesses, provide congressional testimony, and speak to national and international audiences about the threats posed by extremism. Our work is both proactive and reactive, flagging information, chatter, and incidents, identifying symbols and trends, or providing expertise to assist ongoing investigations, testifying on Capitol Hill regarding extremists in the military, funding sources, or the internationalization of white nationalism. At other times, we unpack a narrative or explain a movement or a subculture. Now, in our work, we go where the hate is. In this case, hate is increasingly living on the internet, and that's why we established the Center on Technology and Society. In the age of social media, we see virtual hate migrate and constantly change. But regardless of the space, these groups use technology to reach, recruit, and radicalize, from online to on the street. Some quote unquote innovative ways extremists use technology to spread hate include disinformation efforts designed to sow fear and anxiety, or accentuating divisions between groups. They recruit or they indoctrinate. It gives them access to a global community. It also provides the power of cover and anonymity. They also use it to conduct extremist activity in and of itself. Some examples are robocalls, for example, telling people that their information will be used for immigration checks, or that an election line is too long and that they should vote another day after the election is already over. They will target religious institutions with swatting, falsified calls to law enforcement to instigate aggressive armed police response, frightening a community. Or they will even live stream terror attacks. So at this point, let's talk about the hate. What do the numbers tell us? At ADL, we measure hate in a variety of ways. We conduct attitudinal surveys through a set of questions we developed with social scientists at UC Berkeley beginning in 1964. At that time, 29% of Americans held anti-Semitic attitudes. Over time, the number declined, and in recent years, it has remained relatively stable at around 13%. Now, attitudes do not equate with actions, and so for that, we produce an annual audit. So here are the results of ADL's audit of anti-Semitic incidents over the past decade. These measure lawful and illegal incidents. They include harassment, vandalism, and assaults. Our 2020 report is not yet complete, so the latest available number is from the 2019 audit. That year, as you can see by this graph, marked the highest total in over 40 years of measurement. It was a 12% year-over-year increase, and the two preceding years were also among the highest on record. Within those totals, ADL recorded 270 anti-Semitic attacks attributed to known extremist groups or individuals inspired by extremist ideology. This represents 13% of the total number of incidents. In 2019, assaults doubled from the prior year, and there were increases in all of the measured categories. Now, the audit does not account for generalized online hate, which is not particularly directed at an individual. There's simply too much volume. For that, we are developing an online hate index, which is a tool we will use to examine the scope and nature of hate. We generally think of online extremism and hate related to traditional social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, etc. And to be sure, they are important in the discussion about the spread and proliferation of hate. However, there are many ways online hate is expressed. Here we see screen grabs of Zoom bombing incidents. ADL was among the first to identify and document this trend and worked with Zoom to improve security settings to reduce this new form of harassment. Andrew Auernheimer is pictured here. He's the administrator of a website called the Daily Stormer, a neo-Nazi website, and a hate innovator. He was also responsible for the mass flyering of racist and anti-Semitic content in 2016 that struck at over 50,000 unsecured printers on college campuses across the country. In essence, he recognized that colleges would not attach a password to a networked computer for the use of graduate students and professors. So he logged into each of these printers and directed them to print an anti-Semitic and racist flyer at his behest. This activity, while incredibly effective for his extremist ends, was not illegal. Gaming plays a huge role in American life. According to the Entertainment Software Association, 75% of American households include at least one gamer, and the video game industry generates more money annually than the film and music industries combined. ADL's 2019 nationally representative survey of Americans who play online multiplayer games found that 23% of respondents were exposed to extremist, white supremacist ideology in online games. Here you see a screenshot taken from one of the most popular games in the Nintendo game system, Animal Crossing, which is clearly designed for young people and used, in this case, as an instrument of intimidation. 1 in 3 American adults report being subjected to severe online harassment, and it takes various forms. Doxing, which is the publication of public documents of an individual, like their home address, the schools where their children attend, or other public documents as a form of harassment. Swatting, which we mentioned before, the calling of police with the intent of eliciting an armed response, like a SWAT team, and has led to 1 documented killing. Deep fakes are the manipulation of video to create synthetic media, audio, video, or photos, as was once done to Speaker Nancy Pelosi to make it appear she had a cognitive issue or the slurring of her speech. In most circumstances and in many states, this activity is not illegal. ADL has a campaign to close the online loophole for hate and extremism called Backspace Hate. In 2020, we succeeded in passing a statute in the state of Washington to criminalize swatting. So let's look at crime committed in the name of hate and extremism. So here you see the total from the last year on record, 2019. And as we will see, hate crimes are on the rise in the last 3 years on record. They are becoming more violent and more deadly. In 2020, although the hate crime statistics are not available yet, domestic extremists killed at least 17 people in the United States in 15 separate incidents. This represents a significant decrease from the 45 extremist-related murders in 2019 and the 54 murders of 2018. But in fact, it is the lowest yearly total since 2004. The pandemic aside, the main reason extremist-related murders in 2020 declined is because of an absence of a mass shooting or other mass casualty attack, like the 2019 El Paso Walmart shooting or the 2018 synagogue shooting in Pittsburgh. The lower murder rate does not mean that extremists were less active. For example, 16 right-wing extremist-related terrorist plots or attacks occurred in 2020, which is an increase over 2019. Similarly, there were over 4,500 incidents of white supremacist propaganda distribution in the United States in 2020, and that's compared to only 2,724 in the prior year. As with most of the past 30 years, the extremist-related murders of 2020 were overwhelmingly associated with right-wing extremists. All but one of the incidents were tied to right-wing extremism, and over half were linked to white supremacists. The remaining murder was committed in the name of left-wing extremism. And as for the second year in a row, there were no killings linked to domestic Salafist or jihadist extremism. 5 of the 2020 murders were committed by anti-government extremists, including 2 people killed by adherents of a relatively new Boogaloo movement. At least 4 killings in 2020 were connected to white supremacist prison gangs, and all but 2 of the victims in these killings were killed with firearms. Guns are the weapon of choice for the majority of extremist-related killings in every year since 2014. Now, there is a consistency of hate. You can see here, year upon year, the race of an individual or institution, or the perceived race of the individual or institution, is by far the most targeted category. Gay men are typically second most targeted, and Jews are typically third most targeted. However, it is very important to add that each year, underreporting remains a significant issue. The Federal Hate Crime Statistics Act does not mandate reporting by law enforcement agencies. It is a voluntary program. Moreover, there can be differing standards for reporting. For example, in the state of Hawaii, who only recently began reporting because they only considered an incident a hate crime if it was convicted under the statute. So vandalism that clearly appeared to have hate as a motivating factor, or other violent acts, if an individual was not apprehended and prosecuted successfully under the statute, they would not report a hate crime incident. Moreover, there remains inconsistent training of law enforcement, so hate crime is not always recognized appropriately or investigated. And finally, the targets themselves may not report a hate crime owing to a variety of factors, including the mistrust of police, fear of retaliation, concerns about immigration status, or concerns that another crime may be more worthy of pursuing. You'll see here not available categories which are listed due to changes in how hate crimes are reported and the improvement of inclusivity when considering who is targeted by hate. The online environment is one major motivating factor in the emboldening of hate and extremism in recent years that we've seen. And while the absolute number of extremists may not be growing significantly, they have become more emboldened for other reasons. Looking back at the Unite the Right rally in August of 2017, we saw real-world mobilization of extreme actors. Unite the Right was one of the largest public extremist rallies in the last decade. And it was at this event that extremists revealed themselves. You follow that trail to the current day, and extremists feel emboldened, stepping out of the shadows and into the mainstream. We have documented white supremacists engaging in unprecedented outreach efforts on American college campuses. We've witnessed the unabashed embrace of anti-Semitic and racist conspiracy theories. The results are deadly. Now, even as we don't have the federal hate crime statistics, we do have some incidents to be able to report. In 2020, in the midst of the global pandemic and stay-at-home orders, there was related bigotry, particularly targeting the Asian and Jewish communities. We also recall the murder of George Floyd, recorded on a smartphone, being lynched for over 8 minutes and 46 seconds. The resulting Black Lives Matter protests throughout the summer were overwhelmingly peaceful, though some did devolve into violence. And echoing the 2016 cycle, a deeply contentious election characterized by harsh political discourse, vitriol, and conspiracy theories added flame to the fire. There were other protests, including mounting anger at perceived government overreach in the name of public health. We saw the rise of anti-government boogaloo movement calling for civil war. Several plots were exposed and murders resulted. Vigilantism escalated, as in the case of 17-year-old Kyle Rittenhouse, who was charged with murdering 2 men. There was an alleged militia plot to kidnap Governor Gretchen Whitmer of Michigan, which was exposed and included a Plan B to take over the Capitol to stage a week-long series of televised executions of public officials. And while most counter demonstrations were peaceful, there were instances of violence. Many counter protesters, identified as Antifa, or short for anti-fascists, a loose collection of groups, networks, and individuals who believe in active, physical opposition to far right-wing movements. Their presence at protests intended to intimidate and dissuade racists, but the use of violence by some Antifa against their adversaries did create a vicious, self-defeating cycle of attacks, counterattacks, and blame, producing dangerous and counterproductive results. In 2020, I've already done that part. So we continue to contend with violence aimed at marginalized communities and religious institutions across the denominational spectrum, including plots and attacks against churches, mosques, temples, and synagogues. A few examples. In April of 2020, in Assumption, Illinois, federal agents charged white supremacist Randall Burns with weapons offenses in connection with an alleged plot to attack a synagogue or mosque. August 2020, Yosef Barasne, a member of the neo-Nazi group The Base, pled guilty to a 2019 targeting of a synagogue in Racine, Wisconsin. Barasne agreed to threaten and intimidate African Americans and Jews, who the group viewed as enemies of the white race, as part of a larger plot called Operation Kristallnacht, a reference to the 1938 Nazi pogrom in Germany. October of 2020, white supremacist Richard Holzer pled guilty to plotting to bomb a Pueblo, Colorado synagogue. Holzer also encouraged acts of violence against Jews and the Latinx community. Holzer allegedly met undercover agents at a motel in November of 2019, planning to ignite explosives at the synagogue the following morning on November 2nd. Undercover agents brought 2 pipe bombs and 7 sticks of dynamite, all of them inert, which Holzer intended to use in his attack. He called the plan his, quote, mountain, and referred to Jews in the synagogue as a, quote, cancer. November of 2020, Connor Climo admitted to planning violent attacks against the Anti-Defamation League, a Las Vegas synagogue, and the LGBTQ-friendly bar in the area. He was ordered to serve 2 years in federal prison. In June 2019, ADL's Center on Extremism provided law enforcement officials with warnings about Climo's online threats against synagogues and information about the neo-Nazi Führerkrieg division. June 2019, authorities in Northern California arrested Ross Farka on state felony criminal threats and weapons charges. They acted on an anonymous tip sent to the Concord, California Police Department, flagging a potential imminent threat. The criminal complaint states that Farka used the handle Adolf Hitler 6 million, and he encompassed the 6 million in multiple parentheses, which is a white supremacist symbol to draw attention to something that is perceived to be Jewish. He repeatedly posted online threats against, quote, high-value Jewish targets and police officers, and praised the Christchurch mosque shooter as a hero, boasting of his violent plans. Quote, want to see a mass shooting with a body count of over 30 subhumans, end quote. The platform hosting these threats, Steam, is the leading storefront and social media platform for PC games. If the past is prelude, we need to take extremists at their word. Online extremists have called for continued violence, targeting law enforcement and elected officials, and optimizing on the now or never momentum following the January 6th insurrection. There are calls to, quote, shoot politicians and encourage a, quote, armed struggle, and a continuation of calls for, quote, a race war. Several 4chan posters, this is another platform that is a favorite of extremists, have suggested that the violence on January 6th was only a preview of what pro-Trump extremists would unleash on the country on Inauguration Day. Of course, that didn't come to pass, but there is some concern that March 4th, which is the original date of inauguration as mentioned in the Constitution, may prove to be a date to target some action on the part of extremists. Again, we have no direct information or specific threat available concerning any attacks on March 4th. Conspiracies about the election and now the insurrection also continue to circulate. They include the notion that Antifa provocateurs led the charge into the Capitol, or claims that Ashley Babbitt is actually alive. This is the woman who was killed inside the Capitol building, and that she is really a crisis actor, in addition to other potentially dangerous misinformation. Violent hatred can quickly migrate from the virtual space to the real world. We've seen very clearly extremist rhetoric translated into real-world violent action. Recent past examples include an alleged member of the Atomwaffen division, which is named after a Nazi division in the military, charged with the murder of Blaise Bernstein, or the assailant in the Tree of Life mass murder in Pittsburgh, who posted his views and hinted at his motivations and intentions just prior to the attack. And pictured here is Timothy Wilson, who was killed by FBI agents as he was on his way to attack a hospital. He thought it would give him the best opportunity to kill a group of marginalized people. Wednesday, January 6th, 2021, pro-Trump extremists, including many identified right-wing extremists, stormed the U.S. Capitol building, interrupting the congressional session to affirm the Electoral College count and forcing the evacuation of the Vice President, Speaker, and members of both houses of Congress. The nation watched the chaos unfold, including scenes of the mob on the Senate floor, in House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's office, and overtaking the Capitol steps. 5 people died that day, 3 from medical emergencies, and 1 pro-Trump extremist was shot inside the Capitol. Later, an officer succumbed to his injury, allegedly inflicted on him by a protester who smashed a fire extinguisher against his head. 2 other police officers committed suicide in ensuing days, possibly due to PTSD. Ideology, disinformation, mob mentality, and a deep sense of purpose all swirled together. But anyone who had been paying attention to extremist activity across the country, or to the chorus of disinformation and hatred rampant across right-wing media and its social media counterparts, could have expected the outcome. In fact, ADL issued a report on January 4th warning of the potential danger. Many of the people who were roused to violence at the Capitol are the product of weeks, months, and years of incitement. Conspiracies are the lifeblood driving the current extremist landscape. Conspiracy theorists and even some mainstream conservative media pushed wild ideas, like the debunked Sharpiegate theory, which claimed that voters in Arizona had used pens that could not be read by vote counting machines. Some believers blamed the voting machines themselves, claiming without evidence that the Dominion Voting Systems, which is a company that sells voting equipment, had deleted millions of votes. This theory eventually made its way to Donald Trump, who tweeted it out in all caps. Provocateurs like Alex Jones, who's shown here with a bullhorn, dispense a wide range of bizarre beliefs, speaking at rally after rally. He talks about a shadowy cabal that is manipulating the world, seeking to strip Americans of their freedoms and render them slaves. At the Stop the Steal Washington, D.C. November rally, Alex Jones screamed, quote, "Death to the New World Order, death to tyranny, and life to America and our unborn children. The pedophile globalists and their attempted election steal and the Clinton blackmail rings have only summoned the sleeping giant that is America," unquote. QAnon is a wide-ranging conspiracy theory, popular among a range of right-wing extremists and even some public supporters of President Trump, and now members of Congress. QAnon is first and foremost an online trolling and disinformation movement attracting thousands of believers. Adherents follow the anonymous Q and believe world governments are being controlled by a shadowy cabal of pedophiles who will eventually be brought to justice by Donald Trump. Ultimately, the conspiracy actively sows distrust in democratic institutions. They paint Trump as a messianic warrior, battling deep state Satanists. Now, not all QAnon adherents are inherently extremists, but this is a dangerous theory that has inspired violent activity. In this backdrop of swirling disinformation, there is a sense of loss, that something rightfully earned was taken away. The conspiracy that the election was stolen both animates and ignites those that feel wronged. According to their rationale, the government is not legitimate, and therefore anti-government action is. Moreover, acting against the government is perceived not only as justified, but necessary. And so extreme right-wing identifiers were on full display in Washington, D.C. on January 5th and 6th. These images are taken from footage and photos. Some of these symbols were on shirts, flags, hats, stickers, linking to right-wing extremists across the spectrum. We see here a few of them. Most notably, the following groups: the 3%ers, which is an anti-government extremist group. They derive their name from a disproved theory that only 3% of the American colonists took part in the Revolutionary War. They style themselves as revolutionaries in that same vein. And so you see they use things like the original United States flag, the Betsy Ross flag, doctored with their symbol of 3%. They also use the term and the phrase 1776. Again, all hearkening back to the notion that they are the ones who are exemplifying the revolutionary spirit and throwing off the shackles of tyranny. You also see here the Oath Keepers, which is a militia-style group that targets law enforcement and military members. In particular, they believe that they should be keeping the oath of their office, which is to protect and defend America against enemies, foreign and domestic. They believe that there are some of those domestic enemies here today that they need to, true to their oath, fight back against through their militia. And also, there's the Proud Boys, which you see displayed here and which I'll discuss in a moment. Those three groups were prominent and may have been organizing in some fashion the events that unfolded in the Capitol that day. Now, of course, there's also the QAnon conspiracy theory, which we talked about. This secret cabal is their theory, the secret cabal that manipulates power and control and tries to manipulate things in ways that only a certain enlightened leader, in this case Donald Trump, can fight back against. We also saw evidence of the white supremacist Groyper Army, who led chants of, quote, America first, and, quote, Christ is king, as well as other groups, like the NSC, a neo-Nazi group with a small autonomous regional chapters in the United States and also abroad. Or Kek, you see here the Kek flag, which is styled after a Nazi flag. It's a fabricated deity, Kek. It's semi-ironic, viewed somewhat as a religion, and it's embraced by alt-right white supremacists. We also see other smaller groups that were identified that day. You see the F around and find out cap of one of the people on display, and also the New Jersey European Heritage Association. The Proud Boys. Now, they represent an unconventional strain of American right-wing extremism. While the group can be described as violent, nationalistic, Islamophobic, transphobic, and misogynistic, its members represent a range of ethnic backgrounds, and its leaders vehemently protest any allegations of racism. Their founder, Gavin McInnes, went so far as to file a defamation lawsuit against the Southern Poverty Law Center when the SPLC designated the Proud Boys as a hate group. They operate as a fraternity. They call themselves male chauvinists, Western chauvinists, excuse me. Their ideology is primarily alt-right, misogynistic, as I said, Islamophobic, transphobic, anti-immigrant. Some members do espouse white supremacy and anti-Semitic ideology and engage with white supremacist groups, but some do not. Among their notable characteristics, the members frequently wear black and yellow Fred Perry style polo shirts. And here, as you can see on that day at the Capitol, they distinguish themselves by wearing orange caps. Proud Boys have chapters in most states and several international chapters, including in Great Britain, Norway, and Australia. Their membership is controlled through local chapter leadership and is subject to initiation rituals. And in fact, there is some argument over who is the leader of the Proud Boys nationally after there's been some controversy over Enrique Tarrio, who's the current leader, potentially being seen as someone who cooperated with law enforcement in the past. Their tactics involving in public rallies and protests, and their members have been known to engage in violent tactics, and several members have been convicted of violent crimes. And here I pointed out in this image, not only do you see the Proud Boys distinguished by those orange caps, but they're also flashing the OK sign. Now, the OK sign can simply be a sign for OK. Context in examining extremists and extremist symbols is always important. But in this case, the OK symbol is a white power symbol. If you think about the way that the hand forms, It forms the shape of the W and the P for white power. Of the 212 individuals identified by ADL Center on Extremism at the Capitol that day, 52, or about 25%, have ties to known right-wing extremist groups. Again, those include the Oath Keepers, Proud Boys, Groypers, Three Percenters, and QAnon conspiracy theory. Now, during the rallies, one of the greatest sources of intelligence information for us on what was happening on the ground were the number of live stream feeds. This is another way that technology plays into the emboldening and the increasing of extremism and extremist action. Some of the extremists broadcast on an array of platforms, including DLive, Periscope, Facebook Live, Twitch, and Instagram. It's notable that there are performative elements of extremism. They weaponize the technology to expand their reach, but also fuels this hateful subculture, while at the same time enveloping those engaged in this virtual community with a sense of belonging. Live streamers will banter with one another. They will interact with posts on their chat from their followers. They are egged on to engage in specific acts or in racism or anti-Semitic hateful behavior. And in some cases, they will cash in. Followers will donate to their live stream in exchange for a particular shout out of a phrase or their ideology. And here you see images of some of the specific individuals that our Center on Extremism has identified and provided to law enforcement. I just heard this morning that as of today, over 270 individuals have been apprehended who took part in the storming of the Capitol on the day of the insurrection. So invariably the question is, what can be done and what should you do? Well, as I said at the outset, we encourage you to speak up, to share facts, to show strength. And there are a number of tools that ADL can provide to help you. And there are a number of other agencies and organizations that can also help. Here you see something called the PROTECT Plan, which is a new plan that ADL has developed. PROTECT is an acronym. It stands for P, prioritize preventing and countering domestic terrorism. R, resource according to the threat. O, oppose extremists in government service. T, taking domestic terrorism prevention measures. E, ending the complicity of social media in facilitating extremism. C, creating an independent clearinghouse for online extremist content. And T, targeting foreign white supremacist terrorist groups. Now, it may sound like a misnomer, but it is true that white supremacy and in fact white nationalism has become an international movement. There are ways in which the movement communicates, shares ideas, ideology, what they would consider best practices with one another in order to further radicalize one another and draw from one another's strength. It's another way in which not only the internet, but also extremism itself can breed further extremism. Another thing that you can do is to respond to hate. And this here we have an online comprehensive guide, which concerns steps that you can take and also lists a number of the organizations that can help when individuals are confronted with hate incidents and hate crimes. It explains the difference between a hate incident and a hate crime and where people can go, and lists a number of different community organizations that may be involved. Now, this guide is also translated into Spanish, and again, is free to download online at the ADL website. And we've also translated it into Arabic. And sadly, in our interconnected world, we must remember to consider how hate affects children. Recall the image from the children's video game that you saw earlier in the presentation. ADL has guided age-appropriate discussions and lesson plans and bibliographies to help parents, teachers, and children process hate. So it's important to be able to speak about these things with children because invariably they hear about it through friends on social media, through their own explorations on social media, if not through direct encounters with the hate. And please remember to report hate whenever and wherever it may occur to law enforcement and to an agency like ADL that tracks bias incidents. Even lawful expressions of bigotry may be connected to criminal activity or may be a harbinger of a hate crime. Reporting hate can assist investigators or policymakers. ADL has this online portal, adl.org/report, where you may report anonymously, upload screenshots or photos, and help us to track hate in the community. And again, I would encourage you to let the experts decide. You may be encountering hate. It may be a lawful expression. It may be something that was said to you, but that turn of phrase, that flyer, that utterance that you encountered may actually be part of a broader pattern. And if we don't know about the occurrence of these incidents, we cannot necessarily connect the dots and be able to find ways to stand up against the hate. So speak up, share facts, and show strength. And you don't have to be an expert. Sometimes standing up to hate can be as simple as saying, I'm not okay with this. It's not all right with me. Walking away, telling somebody in an online chat, what you're saying is bigoted and I'm not going to take part in this. That's very important because invariably in a situation like that, and this happens whether it's a bullying on a schoolyard or whether it's online harassment among adults, the person who is the aggressor believes that with the silence of other people in attendance, that they have the support of the group. And the person who is the target invariably believes that they are being targeted, not just by that individual, by everybody else who's being silent. So when you stand up and speak up, even to say, it's not okay with me, and I'm not taking part in this, you give hope to the person who's being targeted, and you push back against the person who's doing the aggression. So thank you very much. I appreciate the time and the opportunity to address this important topic, and I look forward to answering your questions.
And Mr. Brisk, thank you very, very much. Yours was truly an extremely important and illuminating presentation. And we do have some questions for you in the time that's left over. If you'll just give me a moment. Well, first of all, do you see people like the former President Trump, Stephen Miller, Rush Limbaugh, Tucker Carlson as kind of modern day versions of Father Coughlin, Henry Ford, Charles Lindbergh?
Well, I don't want to draw too many historical comparisons. I think that can sometimes be a distraction to the issue at hand. I think we have, in the case of some of these figures today, we have a different world. So that social media provides this broad platform for people to be able to influence folks on a mass scale, and it's completely unfiltered and it's completely unfettered. So I do think that some of the things that they represent are very dangerous, but I also think that there are some differences. One of them being, I think there are some specific and distinct ideological underpinnings to the worldview of people like a Father Coughlin that you don't necessarily see in a Donald Trump or in some of these other figures. And so they may be, taking advantage of the opportunity of mobilizing people for other purposes. White supremacy is a very specific ideological construct. It has some very specific beliefs that form its underpinnings. And I think it's important to differentiate that from people who simply traffic in conspiracy theories or lies. Now, to be sure, those are detrimental and those are harmful, and they lay the groundwork for extremism, but they aren't necessarily extremism in and of themselves.
Okay, thank you. The next question we have here: are game companies really aware of what is happening, and what are they doing about it?
Well, many of them are. We've been embarking on an effort to increasingly make gaming companies aware of the ways in which their platforms are being used and misused. Gaming platforms are very difficult because, especially in some of the platforms that use multiplayer games that are associated with online video chatting and the like, it may be difficult to impossible to track the chat that's going on, or be able to moderate the content that is going in there. So we have been reporting these to gaming sites and to some of the providers that are involved in this work.
Okay.
So I'm thinking of groups like Twitch and Steam and some of these other providers. But it's something that's worth noting and something that people in the general public should be aware of, because when you see, for instance, a child or a young adult who's engaged in video gaming, you may not necessarily realize that there are ways in which this can be a method for recruiting, a method for indoctrination, a method for misinformation. And so it's important, as with any other aspect of your online life of your child or people that you care about, to be involved in that online life and be aware of what it is that they're doing and saying.
Okay, thank you. Another question is, why aren't social media companies doing more about hate?
Well, there are some, they have taken some steps, but they can go much, much further. And there are a variety of reasons why. So first and foremost, we talk about social media companies as platforms. Now, the coining of that phrase is specific and it's purposeful, because originally in the development of code that was computer code that was shared among developers, a platform was something where a person would develop a code, they would post it up into a forum where other people could add onto it. The notion being that once you did that as a platform and as the new code was added on, it no longer was your own. It no longer became something that you were responsible for. So the use of this term is very purposeful. It's the notion that, and an allusion to, that social media companies want to view themselves as not being responsible for the content that comes onto their product, onto their platforms. And one of the things that they talk about, and it is true, is that there are a flood, a constant, never-ending flood of information and content that's being posted onto their sites. So it is a difficult task, but these are also the people who have changed our world, and they're not afraid of difficult tasks. We see in some countries in Europe where there have been laws enacted that have demanded that social media companies take action against specific expressions of hatred within a narrow designated time frame, and they are able to respond. We've seen through things like the Stop Hate for Profit campaign that took place last summer, where over 1,000 businesses took part in pressuring social media companies to make change, to clean up their sites. These companies wanted to disassociate themselves from the very hatred and extremism that was being posted on those sites. So we know that change can take place. We know that if there is the will, they can make a difference. We're seeing some ways and it's uneven. There are some companies that have done a better job than others, and we've seen ways in which that can take effect. So for instance, we saw after the January 6th insurrection at the Capitol, Twitter deplatforming people and followers, for instance, of the QAnon conspiracy theory. Within 24 hours, references to QAnon and other QAnon hashtags dropped over 90%. And it actually stayed that way for many, many days, for at least 2 weeks afterwards. Now, there are always new terms and new terminology that are cropping up. There's always ways in which people will innovate to find a workaround. But it's just an indication that if there is a will and if there is significant action, appropriate action taken by social media companies, they can make a dent in this problem.
Okay, thank you. Another question. You did touch on this, but perhaps the person wants a little elaboration. What is the role of local law enforcement? Are local police aware of issues?
I'm sorry, are local police
aware of these issues?
Well, many local police are aware of these issues, but again, depending upon the state in which you live, some of these actions, some of these extreme forms of harassment may not necessarily be illegal. So for instance, doxing, which is the publication of documents that are associated with you. These may not be private documents. So they could be things like, the fact that your house is registered in your name in a public document. Well, they could post that online. Now, it is a public document. It's something that's readily available. But if it's done in a certain way, and again, I go back to the phrase context is key. If it's done in a certain way meant to intimidate or to harass somebody, then there may be something else going on here. And even if that information is supposed to be public, it may be being used, it may be being weaponized in a way to harass and intimidate. So we'd like to see some statutory relief. We've introduced some measures in California and in a few other states. As I mentioned, we've had some early success. We've just started it on this campaign where swatting was made a criminal offense in the state of Washington. But there's much more that can be done. And it takes putting some pressure on the legislatures, state to state by state, to make sure that it's understood that this is criminal activity. It's not just words online. It's not just free expression, but it actually can lead to real world action and real world harm.
Okay, thank you. You know, we have time for 2 questions, and they're both remarkably relevant. Some people think that domestic extremism is exaggerated. How do you respond to that?
I think domestic extremism is, I don't think that it's being exaggerated. I think if we look at what happened on January 6th, we had an insurrection in the People's House. We had the Capitol being stormed. We had the attempt to disrupt the peaceful transfer of power. You know, the rule of law is the bedrock principle upon which our democracy rests. And to have it being fundamentally challenged in such a way by a small group, relatively speaking, of people who are on the very fringe and loosely organized in the way that they were, that just demonstrates the enormity of the problem. I think some of the other statistics that I showed tonight during the presentation about the increased number of hate crimes, the increased violence in the numbers of hate crimes. You know, the only murder that took place in the name of hate in the state of California in 2019 was the murder of Lori Gilbert Kay while she was praying at her synagogue in Poway. You know, extremism is deadly. It needs to be taken seriously. And when people are saying that they plan to do things, when they do it online, when they chat about it, when they talk about it, when they hear echo chambers of it on some of these social media platforms, some of these communication sites where they gather, it becomes an echo chamber and they become radicalized. And we've seen ways in which that results in violence and in murder.
Okay, thank you. And the final question appropriately is, how concerned are you and the ADL of future mass attacks?
Well, as I mentioned, we have no specific knowledge. Certainly if we did, we'd be speaking to law enforcement about it. We have no specific knowledge of any attack that's being planned or imminent. And yet we've also seen on multiple occasions, whether it's at Pittsburgh or El Paso, whether it's in Christchurch or elsewhere, how even a single individual, well armed, can do immense harm and can cause immense damage. And so it's important that you speak up when you encounter hate, that if there's something that doesn't seem right, that you say something about it. Again, recall the case of the man that I spoke of in Concord. It was only because another gamer on his chat was disturbed by some of the things that he was saying and took him seriously and reported it to law enforcement that he was apprehended. And he was found to be in possession of weapons. And he seemed to be, by the pattern of his behavior, serious about what he intended to do. So, you know, that alleged crime that took place was only exposed because of somebody who was willing to speak up and say something. And that's why it's important for all of us to be, in the same way that extremists are being emboldened, we need to be emboldened as citizens, as fellow community members, as members of community that can look out for one another and help each other and do the right thing.
Well, I want to thank you, Mr. Brisk. Your presentation was absolutely excellent, and thank you to everybody who tuned in. And I wish everybody a good night.
Thank you.